once around the park, James, and don't spare the horses.
It's showtime.
Yes, indeed. Toot, toot. Here we go. It is another edition of On the Ledge, your Ontario Politics podcast, recording the morning of May the 21st. So it'll be hard to know what might change between now and the time you listen to this, but, you know, there is that possibility. So a few things to get to. We will want to talk about the airport, the latest developments, or the long-dragging story around the airport in Toronto, Billy Bishop. I do want to get into the questions of what's going on in Niagara region. Heard some interesting intel in terms of the appointment of the regional chair down there. So it'll be good to have a larger conversation about that. But first, let's just get around the table. John Wright is here. He is the CEO of Canada Pulse Insights. Tim Hudak is the former leader of the PC party here in Ontario at Council Public Affairs. Keith Leslie joining us from his lair in Antigonish, Nova Scotia. He's a frequent reporter on CHTV and a commentator at Queen's Park. And the Honourable Kathleen Wynne, former Premier of Ontario. And it's your birthday, I hear.
It is. It's my
Happy birthday.
Well, there we go. And you got up very early for us. You're in Calgary today, so it's a very early start for you. So thanks for doing that.
For you guys, anything.
Well, you know,
on your birthday, no less.
I was going to say, you know, I can't imagine who was second on your list to share your birthday with if we were first on your list.
Well, all my kids have called, so there you go.
Well, as they should. Very nice. I do want to get to some of those topics I listed off the top, but I'm just curious, you know, before we came on, Kathleen, you were talking about your experience on the ground in Calgary. It's one thing to sort of watch it from afar here at the center of the universe and just, you know, take the media read on these things. There's lots going on there, whether it's the pipeline discussion, whether it's the climate questions around the carbon taxes, etc. There's separation, the Indigenous communities and First Nations in Alberta, all of that coming to play. And then even last week where the Premier decided that the question around the referendum petition was, she didn't like the ruling from the government, from the court, so they're going to appeal that, et cetera. There's a whole lot of worms in the can there. What's the vibe and the read on the ground from where you sit?
So I'm out here for a democracy summit, Vote Canada, and it's a collaboration between the Walrus and TMU, Toronto Metropolitan University. And so there were a lot of academics and politicos at this event. And so there were a couple of things that people are talking about a lot. One is the lack of a position from Danielle Smith. So people are convinced that in the next few days, she's going to announce that she's going to put a question on the ballot about separation. And there are, many people who feel that she is not being at all clear enough about her position, that she's not stepping up in terms of, taking the position for the country. And the other thing that people talked about, a couple of things, they asked me how we saw all this from Ontario. And I said, we're hearing that. We're hearing the issue around the Premier not taking a clear position. But also what we hear is that, there's a minority and it's not going to happen. And it's a loud, vocal kind of group, but that it's not going to happen. And I have to tell you guys, I feel more worried about the situation now than I did when I came out here, because that is what we hear in Ontario. That's kind of the in the air, that it's not going to happen. But I worry, and there was explicit talk about this yesterday, that you could slip into something, that it could be a Brexit scenario, that there are a whole lot of people who, want to send a message to Ottawa, and that they may vote to separate because of that without complete information. So I think it's a really worrisome, dangerous situation. And I also have a cousin out here, and I sat with him and a couple of friends, and they don't want at all. They don't want to separate. They are federalists, but they hear a lot of talk in their circles as well. My cousin's a construction worker. He's a general contractor, and so his clients and people are angry. There's a real kind of resurgence of the Western alienation mantra, and so I'm very worried, and I really hope that something something really bad for the country and for Albertans doesn't happen inadvertently. That's my concern.
John, the whole question of the separation question on the referendum is, separate and apart from the fact that there are already, I think, 8 or 9 different questions on this referendum vote. So there are a lot of things going on that could otherwise be a distraction in terms of what's happening in Alberta on that referendum date. But my question for you is, the degree to which we should be paying more attention to it, or share Kathleen's concern. On the other hand, the danger of sort of glossing it over, sort of taking the central Canada view that, it's a minority of people and we're not really going to worry that much about it.
Well, let's deal with the public opinion polling on it, because it's very consistent. So, and you even have to go to Janet Brown, who is very respected out in the Western region, and her read on this would be about 3 in 10 who would flirt with the idea of separation, of which about 1 in 10 in Alberta are very, very strongly in favor of it. So that mirrors pretty much where the polling that I've done out there, which shows that it's 23% to 25% on a regular basis who say that they would consider it, but there's a hardcore of about 13%. So, I mean, in terms of a province, that's a fairly large group of people, and it's far from a 51% majority that you would need. But I think there's a few things to reflect on. First of all, we don't know what the question is. When I took a look at the question that I asked out there, I juxtaposed it with the Alberta question, and the Alberta question was biased. It was flawed. The one that is being proposed, the federal one was much more straightforward. So the question itself and how it is referenced is going to be important, as it always is. Number 2 is the political underpinning of Danielle Smith, because she's being driven by a portion of her party, which in fact is separatist in its drive. And the federal voices have not come to bear yet, although Mark Carney is polling very well in Alberta, especially nowadays. And Jason Kenney is now urging others to get involved in the debate. So that's not had much of an influence yet. The third thing is, though, that regardless of whether it is put on a ballot or not, it's a destabilizing circumstance in the country. And we are going to be looking over our shoulder for some period of time. I mean, there's one side that says, let's just get this over with. Let's put it on and get it behind us. It's not going to solve a whole lot of issues, although Mark Carney doing what he's doing with the pipeline may, put a damper on some of those things. But there is this view of, let's get on with this and let's show that it's not going to happen. The reality, though, is, and I put it back to the panel, is that even if a majority in a province vote to separate from this country, constitutionally, you can't do it. I mean, numerically, there's a whole process beyond that, so it's not a one and done. What it does, though, is offer up instability in terms of our own national growth and what our expectations are. I think Premier Wynne is right. It's there. You could feel it on the ground. It's between a quarter and 3 in 10 Albertans who feel this way. But in terms of its strength right now, it's only about 1 in 10 who are really driving this. Putting on a ballot may be an option because it's being driven behind the scenes by a constituency that the Premier needs for her own well-being inside the party.
Tim, it was interesting. I looked it up, and with the Premier in Alberta, playing this game. This is really, local domestic politics for her as opposed to worrying about the bigger picture nationally. That is to say, though, I looked it up. Ralph Klein is the last premier of Alberta who won consecutive elections. So, I don't think we can underestimate the willingness of Albertans to toss the the current party out of power and bring in a new group. So there's a lot of provincial politics, grassroots politics that's going on here. But again, I'm not sure that we should be ignoring that sentiment. We do so at our peril, don't we?
Yes. Yeah, it's a good point. I was just thinking through about re-electing premiers, and certainly the Conservative party out there, whatever name it's had, right, has a recent history of changing its leaders internally. Their system does allow that. And did Ralph Klein actually end up losing a confidence vote at the end of his career? That's my recollection, or it was pretty close anyway. So here's a couple things, and Premier Wynne would have had this experience at a premier level. I always found it interesting work as a minister at our interprovincial meetings, to try to learn a little bit about the different motivations of the other provinces. And Alberta and Quebec were usually sort of my go-to allies to push against the federal government. And now in my new capacity, Council of Public Affairs as partner, do some work in Western Canada. It never would be the lead because I don't pretend to know the intricacies of the political dynamic. I guess I've learned not to try to think we know too much in Central Canada how other regions may feel. So before I pass judgment, I'd like to hear more evidence, or maybe we could bring in a guest. They give us a bit better perspective on what would drive Danielle Smith's decision making. Look, the bottom line is they should have a vote, right? If they reach the level that was required for the petition, seems to me, then get it out of your system, have that vote, no matter what our trepidation may be, and certainly if you have a judge come in. When one of the driving factors behind Alberta's separation is that too much is controlled by Central Canada, suspicion of Supreme Court decisions, no Pipelines Act, all that kind of stuff. And I don't think the judge made the right decision here in Alberta either to intervene so early in the pipeline of the process. So this will actually add to the flames. Have the vote, have a fair question. I'd love to actually dig on the motivation.
Keith, when we look at this, and it occurs to me, and John makes the point, just because they vote in favor of separation doesn't mean it's a done deal. But what it does do is it plants a flag for a separatist movement foundationally in Alberta. So to me, it kind of is reflexive of what happened in Quebec with Lucien Bouchard, who was, part of the Mulroney government. And all of a sudden, when he didn't get his way, he decides, to hell with you, I'm going to set up a separatist party in Quebec. And, now that they can kind of hold the government to account specifically, I can see that happening in Alberta, where they would have their own federal party that's just Alberta driven, and they're just going to be a thorn in the side of whatever government of the day happens to be sitting in Ottawa.
I suppose they could go down that road, but it's pretty risky, especially for a province that relies so heavily on outside investment. The instability you're creating by having this referendum in the first place, no matter, if it's 25, 30%, that's a big signal to the outside world that, geez, Alberta's not that stable. We better be careful with our money for coming in there. There's a lot of people really, really angry with their federal government. I agree with Tim and the other speakers that we should not ignore the concerns that have been raised in Western Canada, in Alberta specifically. But I was really quite stunned when Premier Smith didn't take the gift that was handed to her by the courts and say, shit, it's out of my hands. I mean, most premiers in that position would have just gladly said, well, the court has ruled, and to announce that her government was going to appeal the court ruling setting aside the referendum, I thought was a move that was unnecessary on her part. As I say, she had an escape clause there. Clearly, she's doing more than playing footsie with these separatists. She's really trying to make sure that she does not upset them in any way, shape, or form. Tim's point is valid about, they don't like the court rulings, they don't like all sorts of stuff. Nonetheless, we still have rulings by court that are impactful and lawful in this country, and we have to respect them. So, as I say, I was really surprised to see her appeal, mainly because this, as you talk about planting the flag, we go back to the whole Brexit thing. It does seem to be some parallels here. And remember, just before Brexit, they had the vote on the new British fighter ship, and they come up with Bodie McBoatface. Because people were sending a clear signal, we've had enough of your shit. We just don't care about anything you're coming. We want out of everything, basically. And I think there's still some of that sentiment, especially in Alberta. Some of them would go back to the National Energy Program or even before that. that anger has just been is still generational in some people, and they're not going to let go of that. But overall, Canada needs to make a better case, I think. And Carney's doing a good job of it, of convincing Alberta that your best case overall, economically and every other way, is within Canada.
John, we keep hearing the comparison to Brexit. We know that didn't work out very well for the Brits at the time. But again, a different mechanism in terms of, the country leaving the EU versus Alberta going its own way from the rest of Canada. But look down the road here. There's a huge difference as well in terms of the separatist tone and movement that we're seeing in Quebec, and it's very likely that we'll have a separatist government in the province again. So, one way or the other, that is back on the front burner again. So, overall, I mean, where should we be sort of steering the larger ship here to make sure that we can navigate the separatist movement in Alberta, the separatist movement in Quebec?
Well, yeah, the two very different beasts, if you want to put it that way. And we see the CAQ is coming back because they have a new premier and the numbers are better. Even numbers that have been out in the last 24 hours show that it's getting more competitive. So, I mean, that cat hasn't had a dead bounce yet, but let's wait and see where we are. I mean, Alberta is a concern. And we should be concerned about, as I said, the ongoing stability of the country. Mark Carney and Tim Hudak are doing deals. The lone person out at the moment is David Eby, who, is standing on the sidelines saying, me too. You can't get through me yet to go to the coast to do what you want to do, and you're not returning my phone call. So, I mean, the Prime Minister has, in the last 24 to 48 hours, tried to bridge that gap, but that's the next hurdle that we're going to have. Look, I think I'm a little more... I'm a little more specific on the fact that if you have a conservative movement that is right of center, and I mean strongly right of center, that Jason Kenney couldn't be in the room with, and they are supporting the current premier, and she wants to hold on to power, and they happen to be, a significant degree within your own caucus and within the party. I mean, how can she escape that? I mean, to merely suggest that she's going to, acquiesce to the federal, to a judge who says rightly that there should be some consultation with First Nations before you go. But I mean, the whole point is moot if you don't have the national mechanism in the Constitution to actually separate. Look, the thing is that Danielle Smith, when we saw her at her convention, the voices from the floor were very, very strong against her if she was going to pull the plug on this thing. So she's battling an internal circumstance. And so I think this is going to go its full 9 yards. I think that there will be some kind of a referendum which is put to the test. It's going to be nasty because it will also be linked to the United States, especially with the exposure of the voting list and where it's gone. It's going to be nasty. But I think, again, if it's going to be an inevitable circumstance, then I think we have to get prepared for it. And the question is whether or not those who are in Ontario should or would have a voice in it. I don't think they should or would. But really, it's a matter of an internal provincial issue, and the Federalist forces, backed by, subtly by Mark Carney, is going to have to make the case that they are right to stay in power. So, I think David Eby had again when he talked about this, he said, we don't want to just make deals with provinces who have troubles. Referring, of course, as you don't want to make deals just with Alberta because they want to separate. But that's what's in the air at the moment. And I think, for Premier Ford, I think he keeps his powder dry, let it run its course, let the West kind of handle this, and we'll see. But I think a lot of this is internally driven by the caucus and the Alberta Party, which is very, very obstinate at the moment.
And Ralph Klein, I just looked that up, got 55% on his review. And that wasn't enough to stay on. So even though he technically won, he stepped down as Ed Stelmach, as I remember, that replaced him as leader. So I think John's right that Danielle Smith, who came into leadership of the UCP this way, worries about being ushered out. He doesn't move forward. Look, Jason Kenney, Dave, would be a great interview for you. I think he'd have a lot of perspective on this. I actually saw him at the Canada Strong and Free Network and Cardis conventions. One thing he brought up, in our private conversation was around the risks of Section 33 being reviewed, the notwithstanding clause. and how that could be explosive on this issue, depending on the outcome of the Supreme Court.
Kathleen, how does this play at Queen's Park, if at all?
Well, I think John is right in terms of it's an internal Alberta issue. And, if the issue is that there's this feeling about the East, which I know it is, that's what it is, then the worst thing we can do in Ontario is pick up a banner and say, we've got the answer for you guys. Like that, that for sure will mean that there will be a yes vote on the separation, right? So we have to be very careful, but we can still be concerned. And John, I hope you're right about the polls. One of the academics who I was sitting with from University of Calgary asked me if I knew what the number one question was the day after the Brexit vote. And I don't know if you guys know this, but according to him, the number one question that people had the day after Brexit was, what's the EU? Like,
Oh,
so
wow.
the level of information that people have, I really hope that, whatever the campaign is that evolves in terms of, let's not do this, guys. I hope there's good information that people have so that they're voting with their heads and their hearts, but not just their hearts, because that's where it gets dangerous.
Yeah, well, I think that's that will eternally be the issue. And of course, what they didn't have in Brexit, the vote, was the extreme intensity of social media, the whole question around who's zooming who on whatever platform that's out there. But Keith, I just think it's interesting that the tone of voice among the Conservatives, even there, does that suggest a split within the provincial Conservative movement in Alberta if this thing doesn't kind of solve itself?
For
Well, I think
sure.
absolutely that's going to be inevitable because as we discussed, there's a core group in that United Conservative Party of Premier Smith that is wholeheartedly behind this idea of Alberta separation. There's some of them, they're meeting with American officials to discuss ways of funding this sort of thing. I mean, which to some Canadians is treasonous behavior. So I think we need to dial back that kind of rhetoric. As Kathleen says, let's not be telling them what to do and how to do it, but let's let them know that we want them to stay. More than anything, that's the best we can do from Central Canada, or as we like to refer to the Maritimes, Eastern Canada. I know everybody in the West, when it calls East, they mean Ontario, or Central Canada, or Upper Canada, as we like to call it. But nonetheless, this is really an Alberta situation that we can best look at from the outside and advise, only in the sense of, we just have benefits for you. We're not telling them how to do it or what to do, but how we can basically reach out for them. Whether this splits the Conservative Party in Alberta, I just don't have the knowledge to know that. But I would think, as you say, Jason Kenney can't sit in the room with some of these people. So, and he seems to be wanting to be very politically active again in Alberta. So I think, he would be ready to lead a party if it came to that. Does that mean there's an opening for Nenshi and the NDP to come back in? I mean, who knows at this point? Again, Alberta politics is not my area of expertise, but it's certainly very interesting. But the outcome of the referendum, I agree, there has to be a vote. But the outcome hopefully will be as such that it just, settles it down for a while, and there'll always be that hardcore. But if it gets up to 25 and 30%, there's going to be some serious concerns, I think, and rightly so.
Okay, well, we talked about, voting in or out of Canada. Let's just go quick on yeses or nos. Kathleen Wynne, should there be a referendum on the ballot in Toronto on Billy Bishop Airport?
I don't think it's the right way to resolve the issue. I don't think that's a good process in terms of the issue. I think people need more information. I think the business case needs to be made clearly. I don't think it has been. I don't think it's a good municipal election issue.
Tim, I know the councillors who are pushing for this are actually testing the mayor on it. If she's really against this, then she'll actually put her, plant a flag for the referendum vote and let Torontonians have their say on the Billy Bishop expansion.
I think she should say no to referendum. I think that's a distraction, and it's a misrepresentation, right? The city doesn't have authority to enact that ballot initiative in the first place. So why direct energies towards that? and take them off the focus of other important municipal election issues to be decided citywide and on a council by council ward basis. Look, so I'll say yes to the one in Alberta where I have no jurisdiction whatsoever because they got out of the system. I'll say no. And in Toronto, and if there were one, because I can cast a ballot here, right, with property in the city of Toronto, I would say no. I see Billy Bishop as provincial infrastructure. I think it's matured to that level of provincial consequence. I'd like to see it expand. I think it's been a wonderful part of our city and province. So if there is one, I vote yay, and I vote no to keep Alberta within Confederation.
John, this is all performative. I mean, even though the councillors who were talking about, putting this forward agree or understand that, having to get to the finish line is next to zero in terms of possibilities. However, what it is doing is it's actually beginning a conversation at a more grassroots level and to get more people talking about it, as we move into the election period.
Yeah, and actually it's smart politics for Olivia Chow to make it an issue. The last time it was an issue was in the 2014 election campaign for the city. John Tory was cautious, surprise, and Doug Ford was very supportive, and then Olivia Chow was against it. There's lots of reasons to vote against Olivia Chow right now if you don't like her, because of the way the city is run, the taxes, all those sort of things. But if you make this the major ballot question, then it will pass. She'll campaign for it, to block it, and it becomes the essence of her campaign, and all the issues that Brad Bradford has been putting on the table just evaporate or mainly go to the sidelines. They'll try and make it something else, but if she decides to do it, there's evidence that it would be successful, saying that it should be stopped. I guess a bigger issue to me.
Sorry, John. Would it if you take in Etobicoke and Scarborough and North York, have you run the numbers on that? Would it pass?
Yeah, the polls here have not been supportive of it. So, I mean, it can, well, there's always the hardcore downtown, and then there's the softer on the outside, but it's not, if you say, well, what's a win? 51%, that's not it won't pass. So, it's probably about a 70% against. And again, it all comes down to the question and all those sort of things. I guess there's two things that I think about. Number one is, I don't know how linked these things are, but the fact that there was only a month between somebody saying, I think we should buy a jet and I think we should expand a runway, I mean, just seems a bit interesting to me. So that's one thing. And then the second thing really is, the effect that it's going to have. And I know that the Premier has all kinds of broad powers now, given the legislation that's being passed. But the impact that jet runway is going to have, and on the height and density restrictions it will bring, and a whole series of other things. It's not just about the island talking about the noise that it might bring. It's a really substantial issue, and it's been thrown out this week that it's going to create $5 billion worth of potential investment. So that's nonsense. I mean, really. And that's like saying that FIFA is going to increase our tourism after the fact. So, the reality is that there's not a whole lot of disclosure on what the benefits are going to be. But if Olivia Chow is heading into this fall election, and she's already got significant gain over Brad Bradford, there's nothing to stop her from sticking to her record and saying, yeah, we're going to make this the ballot question and the referendum.
Yeah, Keith, it doesn't have to be a referendum even for Olivia Chow to win on this. She can just run against the airport and against Doug Ford and maybe not even mention Brad Bradford's name in some cases.
Well, that's exactly what I was just going to say, Dave. You just took it right out of my mouth. Doug Ford is a perfect opponent for a mayor of Toronto to run against. And this issue sort of fits right into her bailiwick because, he's championing it so much without any real documentation or proper support for it. It just seems another one of, Ford's back of the envelope ideas. But it's a big idea that impacts the city tremendously. The referendum, John's probably right. It probably would be able to have most city residents vote against expanding the airport. I think it's all being rushed a bit too much. As Kathleen pointed out, we haven't seen the business case yet. One thing I did notice in the reporting, though, was that there's only 1.7 million passengers a year right now at Billy Bishop. Before the pandemic, it was 2.7. So they're short 1 million passengers. A third of their passengers haven't come back since the pandemic. Let's address that. Let's get that going and get all those people back and see what sort of traffic congestion and stuff we're dealing with when we get a million more people coming out of that tiny little airport area. Bathurst south of the lakeshore is just a crazy place to have to drive around. If they put jets in there and bring in so many more flights, what are they talking, 50 million passengers a year? So it just seems too much for that little airport, I think, and the landfill and all that. And again, we've heard the government, the province repeatedly saying, Pearson is at its limit, it's at its capacity. And Pearson says, no, we're not. They're revamping now, but they're not at capacity. So there's lots more flights can come into Pearson. And the people in Scarborough and many other parts of the province or the parts of the GTA are happy to fly in and out of Pearson. Downtown is very convenient for Billy Bishop, but not everybody wants to fly in and out of there. And I don't think the jets in the long run are necessary, but at least let's see a business case for it. Let's see the improvements that would come with it, and also the impact on the traffic and the residents in the area. But we haven't seen anything like that to support it yet.
Tim, doesn't it surprise you a little bit that we're this far into this conversation and we haven't really seen any of the homework that has been done on this plan or where the plan is? What exactly are we pitching in terms of, I mean, even the number that the Premier's throwing out in terms of the economic benefits for the economy in Toronto and across the province are questionable. There doesn't seem to be any thing under the numbers that we can point to and say, yeah, there's some research here. The question around the planning, the Toronto planners who are looking at the Portland developments, they're saying, okay, well, we can do this, but we don't know what the plan is for the airport. So how can we actually plan on any kind of housing development in the Portlands, et cetera? How high can they be? All of these sorts of things are up in the air around the whole question. So I think that's what I find most frustrating about this is if this is such a good idea, then where's the business plan, the model that's supporting this that says, oh, okay, we can point to these numbers, the real facts, economically it makes sense, and here's the benefits 10, 15 years down the road.
Look, sure. There's the bulldozer's not lined up, right, to get on the ferry to go across to start laying down the track, and the first ticket's not been sold on the first jet. Like that strikes me as sometime down the road. The phase we're in right now is to enable the province to have the authority to do so. I assume those things come into place. To me, it just seems axiomatic, right? But you continuously invest in your transportation infrastructure like you do with subways, roads, rails. Pearson is a disaster, and that's the most crowded piece of transportation infrastructure, I think, in the region, potentially North America, certainly in Canada. So you need the capacity side. We've got nothing else to build an airport around, and I think Hamilton is just too far away. So sure, but I'm a bit patient on that information because I think the case is, by definition, needed to invest in our airport infrastructure, and this is just a first step for authority.
Yeah, and then the story this morning, Kathleen, that now, for the first time, I'm hearing that this is going to take 25 years. This is a 25-year expansion project, 2051, by the time we get to a point that we're cutting a ribbon to say it's complete.
Yeah, so it probably doesn't have everything to do with Doug's jet, right?
Yeah.
So,
Probably.
but I just think making the case, I actually think a referendum oversimplifies the issue. And I think that making the case during the municipal campaign, for why this is not a good idea. And if there is, if Brad Bradford is Olivia's main opponent and he wants to make the case for why this is a good idea, I think that conversation actually is the one that should be had. It should be explored during the campaign and let people make their decision that way. But 25 years. We just need more information as to why in the most congested part of the city on a waterfront that's got a whole lot going on in terms of, Ontario Place and figuring out what the X is going to be doing and a convention center. We need better information about why this is a good idea. And, honestly, there's nobody except maybe some of the business community who haven't stepped up and made the case, but there's nobody asking for this. The people of Toronto are not asking for this. And so it is analogous to the amalgamation of the city, quite frankly. But the reason I asked John about the numbers is it, intuitively it feels to me like this is more of a downtown issue than it is a
Sure.
suburban or old suburb issue. So I just think that, as I said, I think a referendum would oversimplify it and would actually take away the opportunity to actually have a substantial conversation about why this is a good idea or not.
Yeah, let me chime in. I agree with you. Totally. I mean, you don't necessarily want to box yourself in on something like this. And when I mean referendum, I mean, it could easily be just the theme of the campaign. I mean, it has happened before. I think the question really is this the Doug Ford that doesn't exist now because he's no longer, out there saying things and, off the cuff and making decisions on the fly and doing all this sort of stuff. There was a reset, and we've seen the premier different in the last month or so. And I wonder whether or not that's part of that interregnum from, what was before to now, that this was all part of, Premier, if you're going to get a jet and we're going to get a jet, then we're going to have a place to land. So we might as well, do something down on the waterfront. And now it's, as you say, it could be 50 years before we get it. That's an incremental walk back that takes a long time to get to your destination. So I think, again, there's not a lot of transparency from this government on anything. I mean, just look at Ontario Place and look at the other pieces. So I doubt that we're going to get any transparency on anything like this. If anything, the request for why these decisions were made and how they were made is not going to come to light for some period of time. But in the essence of it, it's, again, you're going to get a majority of people. If you make Doug Ford the ballot question, that's one of the ingredients that's in the air for that.
I think he should focus on the Ferris wheel in Niagara. He's always wanted a Ferris wheel, and this is his big chance to get a Ferris wheel.
Well, here's my concern about the Ferris wheel, and Keith, is that it's infrastructure, promising infrastructure that's going to be built on time, on budget, et cetera, just under the radar. While all this conversation is going on about the airport and how long it's going to take, the subway extension connecting the TTC to Richmond Hill is being delayed because it's dependent upon the completion of the Ontario line, all of which is Metrolinx. So back to John's point, where is the transparency and accountability around this? So, we could still be talking about all of this 30 years from now and still not have any, solution to any of the problems.
Well, especially if Metrolinx gets responsibility for that damn Ferris wheel. It'll be 30 years before we see the damn thing.
It'll be lying sideways.
Yeah, where are we going with this? I mean, Metrolinx in particular seems to be the happiest agency on the planet with the government's FOI changes because they don't communicate with anything anyway. Remember, the last real communication we've had from Metrolinx basically was when they turned it over to AI and it said that the GO trains were going to be arriving in Vancouver. So they had to take that down right away. And since then, they basically communicated nothing on the delays of some of these major projects that, were supposed to be a few years out. Now, well, they're 10 years out or they're 12. It's ridiculous. Why? What's going on? What are the reasons for this? And again, with so many vice presidents, surely to God, one of them could come out and speak to people and tell the taxpayers what's going on, or tell the taxpayers how much they paid for that settlement with the air rights issue, that whole stupid thing where they were sued for $500 million by a company that never owned the air rights, and they've settled. So Metrolinx is the ultimate in obfuscation and not being transparent. And I guess that's why they're the largest provincial agency at this point, because the Ford government is going to make some records in its ability to be non-transparent. The legislation they passed, retroactive to 1988, still has me scratching my head as to why it needed to go back that far and what exactly are they trying to hide. And that's what the basic question comes down to in all of this. What are they trying to hide? It just keeps coming up.
Well, I wonder on the Richmond Hill line, I wonder if the Ontario line, if they have sort of internal information that it's going to take longer because it's supposed to function as a relief line, right? And So you need the Ontario line in order to be able to have more people funneling down from the north. So I wonder if that's the next shoe to drop. I have no idea, but just from my time in transportation, I wonder if because they're all interconnected. You know, you have to look at it's like a domino effect. So who knows?
Okay,
But we may not
except,
get that information either.
well, my worry though, and this might be a capacity issue, Tim, and that makes sense to me. You don't want to put more people in the funnel coming down into the city without having the relief line in place. But they've already put shovels in the ground, and they're planning this, almost as if they got blinders on. They're not watching their own projects.
Yeah. Yeah, you're probably right. You're probably right on the whole funneling thing, and I'll combine that with Keith's point on the VPs. I suggested Jason Kenney to be a special guest, so invite the VPs. Just get the large form of StreamYard, so you can fit in $65.
Okay, I need Keith brought this up, the air rights thing, and the settlement, and it was surely there were all kinds of non-disclosure agreements signed, etc. Tim, can you explain what's going on there? And I'm not suggesting that you have any insight, but you have better insight than I do. So,
no, I'm sorry. This is one I saw what's a topic like. I hope I don't get asked this. I don't know.
Yeah,
I did nothing out on this one.
Yeah, how can you actually get settlement for air rights that you don't own? I just think the whole issue of the air rights thing is kind of squishy to begin with. But anyway, I'd be curious to see. I don't know where that goes, Kathleen. After it's done, it's done.
Well, I think the political saliency of it is that the guy who got the settlement is a good friend of Doug Ford's and sat at, I don't know, the table of his daughter's wedding or something. So, I mean, I think that is that's probably the thing that will be hammered on politically, because, like Tim, I mean, I shrug my shoulders. I have no idea what the backstory is, but that's what will be pulled out of, because it's consistent with Doug Ford and his cronies, right?
John, is this sort of equivalent to the $9 glass of orange juice?
No, I think the Premier must get up every morning, and if he thinks about politics and how he's doing, he looks every day and goes, yeah, there's Merritt over there, and she's going to get maybe 20% of the vote, and there's no Liberal leader, and it's like a breakaway on the St. Lawrence. Really? And I was like, boom, gone. I mean, the only other time that a lot of these things come to the fore is when somebody gets into power after a government's been in power for a period of time, and then they just start dredging it out. We've seen that lots of times. Oh my God, you won't believe how bad it was in there. The deficit is 10 times bigger than it was. Oh, and look at this from Metrolinx. Oh my God, like it'll go on and on and on. So unless the Liberals, and it's just them at the moment who have the potential of having a leader in place, unless they have somebody that they elect in the fall who actually is going to have some traction potentially with the electorate. I don't know whether this matters, because there's a whole bunch more bigger issues that we've seen that the government has been able to skate away from. So I like to bring it back and basically say, elections are about choices. If you don't have a choice, if most of the issues, in fact, are in Toronto and they're not outside of Toronto, then the Conservatives get most of their votes from outside of Toronto. Then they, what are you looking at? A minority. But if they have a significant leader for the Liberal, and it is a choice between two, and if there is going to be a minority or there's going to be some traction, that's when you start getting a little concerned about whether or not you're spending a bit of money on things. Dave, it's not whether stuff is going to be a $9 orange juice. It's going to be whether it's a $9 billion orange juice. And that's more of the tenor of the days as opposed to what happened with Bev Oda.
Tim, is Niagara going to benefit from its? Let's go back to the Ferris wheel. The idea of, and I think the point of this is to say, okay, it needs that kind of boost in terms of tourism, and I think we underestimate how much tourism the falls actually attract in this country because they're so close by. We sort of take them for granted. But is there a need here to actually get down and develop that kind of parkland the way they're talking about?
No. I'll come back on detail. Appreciate you asking this. And this one I was ready for. On air rights stuff. I would have, when I was opposition leader, right, you always looked for contracts and to then do the dotted lines about whose friend or donor's benefit. And I would have gone to town, and that's what you do as opposition leader. Then the government has to defend it. And certainly if you don't give a clear defense, you're going to be vulnerable to that. But having known, Premier Ford since 1995 when his dad was elected, I just don't believe in any shape or form there'd be political interference to say that pay this person off or give them benefit either from the Premier himself, certainly not staff. It just doesn't pass muster to me. I think we just don't have full information, and without an explanation by government, that's what opposition parties will do. Okay, Niagara Falls. So I'm actually really excited about the overall vision for Niagara here on the tourism side to take it to the next level. Investments in the airport, by way of example, really solid. I do like the idea of allowing multiple gaming establishments to be in the falls or the region, and the private sector can decide if they can make a profit of it as opposed to locked-in contracts and the heavy weight of the Ontario Lottery and Gaming Corporation, over them. There's plans to turn the old Toronto Hydro. You may have seen it when you're in the falls. There's this building right on the river's edge that was a generator, and it's been mothballed for a long time, to turn that into, high-end luxury hotel and entertainment space. That's fantastic as well. Transit along, the parks and such as well to move from site to site. There's an old OP generating station that's no longer used at the bottom of the falls. So we're going to RFP on what that could be from a tourism perspective. This is all very grand and exciting. And now with the closure of Marineland, there's also, expressing interest in bringing some brand new tourism attraction, could be like a Six Flags, Mattel, or Lego. These are some of the things in the ointment. Long list, all exciting. We already have a Ferris wheel there, and Deb and I and the girls have been on it pretty regularly. What's interesting here, a couple things, Dave. It's about 180 feet tall. The proposal for the provincial one done in the Niagara Parks land is over 500. It's what they call a mega wheel. So if you're picture yourself standing there at the base, right, where you're at falls levels, it could go up as high as the Skylon Tower. That's massive compared to where we are today. And you have all those hotel properties that are there, and you're going to have this massive wheel now potentially obscuring the view, of the falls. And historically, the parkland itself was developed in a different way than the American side, where it's more industrial. They try to keep a park-like feel. So they try to make sure that any tourism attractions fit in largely with the overall park-like feel from Fort Erie through the Falls, Niagara Lake. And this is in the opposite direction. So this is the one piece of the pie that I don't think makes sense. And it's not an instant win either, right? Well, we think of the one in London that did very well. Others are marginal. In places like New York City was one. I would have my notes here. Melbourne, Australia went into bankruptcy because these are awfully expensive to build. So there's a long story there. The rest of it, all great. Big new Ferris wheel that could obscure views, not so hot.
Could it go up on the escarpment, Tim? Could they put the Ferris wheel up so it's not blocking the views of all the hotels?
Yeah, so that's the traditional way, right? The Clifton Hill area, it's above the escarpment. It's not on the parkland, and that's, like Vegas for kids and teenagers. So there is a Ferris wheel there. As you know, it's not a mega one. You can expand that. But putting it on the park itself, that massive piece of infrastructure, that really runs against the grain of what we've done along the parkway the last 140 years.
Well, we could develop where Isaac Brock is pointing, out into the escarpment. Niagara. Sure. And the last thing you want to do is make Niagara Falls kind of seem tacky by putting this in. Niagara Falls at the end of the day is. Never mind. Is another joke there. But again, this was.
You take pride in that too.
It's the second biggest disappointment. The issue really is again, it comes down to this thing. Is Doug Ford was making a whole series of ballot questions around him. Is this the legacy? Is this it? This is the third term, and it's embroiled in municipal infrastructure. And the question in my mind is whether or not, to your point, Tim, there's lots of good stuff that could be happening down there. This is a redundancy, and really seems folly more than anything else.
It's something he can talk about. It's something he's passionate about, as opposed to that air rights issue. Because again, he was pressed. Why won't you tell us how much Metrolinx had to pay of taxpayers' dollars in this settlement for these air rights? And he won't tell you. He said, I don't get involved in private business. This isn't private business. The government was sued And successfully, apparently, they settled. Well, Metrolinx, the government agency, settled. And he can't just brush it off like that. He's been able to because the House wasn't sitting. The House will be back next week. And I think he's going to face some tough questions on this because, again, it's the appearance of someone who he's appointed to chair the LCBO, chair Ontario Place, and he sat with the Premier at the Premier's daughter's wedding. This is someone with pretty darn close ties to the government who managed to sue the government agency Metrolinx, for air rights that his company did not own. That raises just a whole whack of questions, and the Premier can't just brush it off like he has done so far.
Well, Kathleen, he can brush it off because we're talking about the Ferris wheel. And in
Well,
as much as we've got
exactly.
these distractions, right?
He can brush that off. We're talking about the Ferris wheel. We're not talking about the fact that the Minister of Education is not allowing the boards under supervision to stream their committee meetings or the special education meetings. Like, that's the stuff that is undermining our institutions, hurting kids, hurting families, and we're not talking about it. So when you sent out the list of topics and the Ferris wheel was on it, when I was making my notes, I just put beside it, don't care. I don't care about the Ferris wheel. Tim, I'm glad I kind of care about the airport because I think it's going to wreck the waterfront. You care about the Ferris wheel because it's going to wreck the view of the falls. But this is the stuff he wants us to be talking about, not the fact that our education system is disarray, healthcare. It makes me a bit wild, I have to say.
Still, though, distractions in and of itself around Niagara, Tim, there's a lot of question about what the regional chair is who the regional chair might be, how the appointment's going to happen, what's the criteria, all of that sort of thing. That seems to be front burner. But I was talking to our friends at CKTB this week. I was on with Gene Belaitis, and we were talking about the Niagara chair, and he's hearing on the ground that the appointment may come well after the fall election.
Oh, I think that's likely. Yeah, I think that's likely. Here's why. The last one was a train wreck, right? Like, there was just a public relations disaster for the government, set Niagara back in terms of organizing anything. So I think the logical move is to quiet things down. Under the Regional Niagara Act, there are acting regional chairs. They sort of rotated among elected councillors. So you just go quiet through the municipal election, and then they'll do the appointment after that. I think that's a likely path. I think the likely path, too, is to be a bit more transparent, a lot more transparent and thoughtful about it. Current plan looks to be application-based. So talk about your experience in governance. Have you been on municipal council? You served provincially, federally? Have you been a business success? You've been an active community leader? And look at those criteria. The new formulation is a combination of the strong mayor powers and an appointed chair. This creature does not exist, right? It gives him or her a lot of authority. And so if you're going to do that, at the very least, have a very transparent, open application process and invite the best to qualify, not who went to a fundraiser or whose buddy was whose.
But so let me follow up on that with you, because if that's the case, and we're going to deal with a resume and, sort of an HR approach to this, how does that fit with whatever the issues of the day or the ballot questions that are local and very strong municipally in Niagara in the fall? I mean, does there not have to be some connection between the view and the vision of the chair and the expressed vision of the council as it's being elected?
So you mean, I'm not sure we go with that. So yes, right? I mean, the qualifications should be somebody who's going to be effective in the job. The federal government's made a transition where they want to make sure it's better linked with provincial priorities, hence the appointment. But you'd be a pretty bizarre decision to appoint somebody who has no connection whatsoever with the way decisions are made, or who can't effectively lead the council by going off in their own direction. Look, I mean, Jim Bradley was the first appointed regional chair, did a great job. God rest his soul. If you can find somebody else of that caliber that has the experience, the calm, and leadership skills, it's better than the last.
Yeah, I guess, Kathleen, the point then, if council has a very specific mandate, should that not be part of the application consideration for the chair of the region?
Sure about that. I think to Tim's point, the chair needs to be somebody who can navigate the regional issues. I think that's what you're looking for. And there may be some very specific. Well, there will be some very specific issues on the agenda of the election. But I think if you've got somebody. And first of all, there was only one Jim Bradley. There's not another Jim Bradley. But if there's somebody who understands the region, understands the issues, and is able to navigate them, I think that's what you're looking for, Dave.
Yeah, I guess, John,
the transparency. But everybody should understand what the process is going to be, and it seems like that is the problem right now. Nobody really knows what the process is going to be.
Yeah, and again, I kind of come back to this whole idea. It's great that, to some degree, if you want to move things through and you want to navigate the issues of the region, John, to have some of those strong mayor powers, it kind of, cuts through some of the backroom BS that might be going on. But at the same time, there's no elected mandate. So whoever takes that job, I think, is going to be kind of in the hot seat from day one and under pressure to make all the right decisions, no matter what the issues are.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think it's going to be, Tim's got all the, the finger on the pulse, in that region. It's going to be, everything we talked about this morning is a ballot question, right? Even the education.
I know who could be the regional chair.
Yeah.
He's on this panel.
I'm sorry?
Tim, you could be the regional chair.
Oh,
there you go.
And then my ultimate plan for one greater town of Fort Erie and moving regional headquarters to Wellandport.
Yeah, I don't really have. I think all of those things are true, and I think whoever takes the post is going to have a real municipal issue on their hands, just in terms of support, and it's a ballot question for Doug Ford. Again, I go back to this, and the question is, how can something like that be steered effectively when it's coming from the Premier's office and it is Doug Ford?
Keith, when we look at everything else we've been talking about, the Premier, though, opens himself up for, having one of his buddies run the region. Somebody said, we just hope it's not another failed Conservative candidate. Already, the cynicism, it's not even skepticism, the cynicism around this is ripe.
Absolutely, and it always will be when you're going to appoint an unelected chair over top of these elected mayors. That's just going to have cynicism built right into it. There's no two ways about it. I think one big way to counter it would be, of course, to find another Jim Bradley type liberal or a New Democrat, someone who is not a conservative. But that's not what they're looking for. I think they're going to absolutely have someone who has conservative ties, because the whole point of appointing this person is to make sure that conservative policies, especially on housing, are pushed through over these 12 councils. So while it would be a good signal to send someone to appoint someone who's not a conservative, I think it will be someone with close conservative ties that is appointed by the Ford government to chair an Niagara region.
Okay, well, before we go, we just want to have a shout out to the track star and the Hudak Hutton household. Last year we were talking about the champion. How did we do, Tim?
Yeah, thanks. So the champ is back. So we're recording Thursday morning, yesterday, Wednesday, at Varsity Stadium, which I think is going to remember forever. 12-year-old right now, right? Like I will, Dad, I would have if I had that moment. Yeah, she was a superstar. So she won the gold medal in the long jump for grade 6s with her best jump ever. So a nice picture of her on the podium, and her relay team, which are awesome. They won the regionals in the citywide. They came third by a nose. Maitland's the anchor. I didn't know this either. I guess you had to cut the tape with your chest. She leaned forward like with her leg, just a hair short of the silver. So a double medal winner. Really proud of her. And as a dad, just sort of her composure and that pressure with like 1,000 kids and teachers and parents watching you, and her drive, very impressive qualities. Takes after her mom.
Sunny, bright blue day. It was what a great day. So well done. So
thank you. Thanks for asking.
Enjoy that. All right, that'll do it for us this week. It's On the Ledger, Ontario Politics Podcast. Thanks to Tim Hudak, Kathleen Wynne, happy birthday, John Wright, Keith Leslie, and we'll be back at it again next week. The legislature is actually sitting next week. I mean, holy cow, what could happen next?
Wow.
That'll do it. I know. I'm Dave Trafford. Enjoy your weekend, and if you enjoy what we're doing here, share the show leave us a comment, and make sure that you hit the follow button. Have a good weekend. I'm Dave Trafford.
Pay no attention to that man behind the curtain.